You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Batuta Advocate, on Desert Rock FM. Well, welcome back to Desert Rock FM on the Batuta Advocate radio show. You're here with Clancy Overall, myself, and Errol Parker. Today we have a very generous guest who's given us the time of day for an interview, hounded by media. She's not really being gifted the same amount of positivity in the headlines as her opponent. She's an Olympic medalist, a world champion skier, a barrister, and what some people are saying is the next member for Warringah. Thank you for joining us, Zali Steggall.
Thank you, guys.
Now, first question, Zali, this is for the nation, and probably a lot of people in your electorate are wondering, if you are to be elected as an independent for the member of Warringah, will we see you standing by a convicted pedophile?
No. That would be a no.
So there's a lot of controversy that's kind of plaguing your political opponent right now. What do you think is the biggest kind of concern in the electorate on the ground? Everyone around the country has a lot of things that they could say about Tony Abbot. What would you say is the immediate concern on the ground?
Look, he's definitely a very divisive figure, and we're getting a lot of commentary from all over Australia and expats that have a lot to say about him. On the ground, mostly lack of representation, that it's time to move on. Very key moment, I think, for the electorate was the same-sex plebiscite last year. With the vote, a very clear endorsement from this electorate, over 75%, and he was extremely disrespectful in walking out of the parliament when the vote was on.
And, of course, not everyone thought it was possible to punt these old Canberra types out of their job, as we saw in the Wentworth by-election, where, you know, it is possible to uproot these old trees that have grown in these blue ribbon seats.
It's always possible. No dream is too big. You can always you can achieve any goal. Look, if a Manly girl that becomes world skiing champion says it all. No doubt, Wentworth by-election was inspiring in showing what grassroots dissatisfaction and what the people can actually do. People power can never be underestimated, and I think the Canberra bubble of long-standing politicians is exactly that. They do lose touch with what matters on the ground.
Up in the Diamantina Shire, the last thing we heard from Tony Abbot in regards to the Warringah electorate was at the Coal Classic, I believe that is, an ocean swim. He raised concerns that there wasn't enough public restrooms for the crowds that come to Manly Surf Beach for the event. Would you too like to echo his calls for more public restrooms?
Well, the irony is I'm an honorary member of the Manly Lifesaving Club, and I did swim the Coal Classic. Look, the irony is any lack of infrastructure can rest on his shoulders since he's been the member for 25 years. We definitely need more dunnies, but we do need more showers, and we actually also need a new surf club.
And also, he drew a lot of criticism with that particular remark. A lot of people were saying, if only we had an elected official who could have done something about this over the last 10, 20 years.
Well, that is the biggest problem I think he's got, is anything lacking or missing in the electorate. Ironically, you've been in the job for 25 years, so if it's not here, clearly you haven't delivered it. And that's why I think overwhelmingly from the electorate's point of view, it's time to move on. It's not time for a bit of a fresh approach and a new future.
And when was the last straw for you? Do you remember the moment when, not necessarily when you said, I'm standing up, I'm going to have a run at this, but when you said, whoa, it's time?
Well, look, I must admit, as much as I'm a moderate in many ways and voting in state elections and local elections, from a federal point of view, I've always had a bit of an issue with Tony Abbot. He doesn't, as a modern woman, his stance on a number of issues are really at odds with my personal stance, in particular as a woman. I think there's a few comments that stand out. The ironing, the housewives ironing around Australia. So for me, look, it's not about one one moment that's really sort of done it for me in terms of him, because personally he's never appealed. But for me, events of last year, just our government, the change of Prime Minister, the complete lack of focus on governing as opposed to personal ambition and vendetta, then the treatment of Julie Bishop, the lack of direction on climate change and really future-proofing us in a number of policy areas. I mean, the list goes on in terms of what ultimately motivates you to take a stand. And for me, it was, I got to the end of last year and I just felt, look, you've got to draw a line in the sand and say, well, there's no point whinging about it behind the scenes. If you're in a position to make a difference, then you've got to give it a go.
Well, we spoke to, in our travels, we have spoken to a lot of people from this part of the world, from, a popular writer who likes to wear a red tea towel on his head. We spoke to a number of sports stars, and they were all considering throwing their bandana in the ring to be the person who topples Tony. What made it? How come you ended up here? When there were lots of other... Yeah.
Well, I think it was me because no one else put their hand up as well. I was getting to the end of last year sort of waiting to see. I thought it was a perfect storm in terms of we were coming up to an election. I don't think the coalition could have stuffed it up any more than they had in terms of failing to focus on governing. I thought the combination of the entire disrespect from a gender representation and the treatment of Julie Bishop, the lack of sensible discussion when it came to climate change and really future-proofing our economy, I think there were a number of people despairing and thinking, well, how are we going to change this? Who are the people that we can actually see as being key to the discussion? And there's no doubt that our current member has been a key component to, I think, the deterioration of the political debate over the course of probably the last 10, 15 years. So I think, there were a lot of people keen to put their hand up, but at the end of the day, look, it takes courage, maybe a little bit of craziness to be prepared to do it. I'm certainly never daunted by a challenge, and generally once I set my mind to something and I'm up for it, then I get to the job of planning for it and how to make it happen.
Yep.
So it all escalated really quickly.
So there's obviously a lot of transferable skills from being a professional athlete to coming into something that's so regimented and structured like an election campaign, I guess.
Look, as an athlete, you plan all year for a couple of seconds, down the course, and you've got to make sure it comes together. You have no control over the ultimate outcome, but what you can control is your performance, your training, your approach, the team around you. They're all the same things that make for a good litigator, as a barrister in court. You don't just turn up and hope hope inspiration will come and you get the right line for the judge. It is about all those things. It's about hard work. So from my point of view, they are all transferable skills.
Yep.
And I think, as we've seen, the mind games and a bit of the competitive play doesn't hurt as well. Sport is a competitive arena. You can't control what the other competitors are doing, but there's always plenty of mind games at the start, and there's plenty of sort of tactics going on. So again, I think I'm fairly well prepared for this arena. It's not a battleground. It is just as he likes to portray it. This is ultimately, I think it's the longest job interview, really.
So just quickly, we want to talk about the person behind the campaign a little bit as well. Obviously, athlete was what was mentioned in the initial kind of headlines when you announced. That was pretty much all the media had of you on record.
Sure.
What have you kind of done since? I mean, that was years ago. What have you've worked as a barrister? You've worked in schools. You've worked all around this electorate.
Well, importantly, I've had kids, which let me tell you is a job in itself. Yep. Look, I retired in 2002 from sport. Mm-hmm. I initially considered a career in media, having done an arts degree in media and communication, but then ultimately thought a career in law was more what I was suited for. So did a law degree, had 2 kids during that. I was one of those crazy students turning up at my law degree, law lectures with a baby and a baby bjorn. Mm-hmm. And then I've been at the bar for the last 10 10 years, and I've worked across areas of advocacy from commercial law, equity, land environment. I've done a little bit of native title, and then ultimately ended up more in sports law and family law. Really enjoyed that process. Sports law and family law is very personal. You're talking about people that are really impacted by events and things that are going on. Generally, the breakdown of the family unit really is their lives are really pulled apart, and they really need that help and that direction in how to make sense of it. At the same time, got involved on a board level with organisations like in sport. So anti-doping, for example, very keen on the fight against drugs in sport.
Manly Sea Eagles have been pretty clean of that over the last few years. But
they have.
The NRL does have a few skeletons further west, I believe.
Well, look, all the sports have to do. It's a huge part of education, educating the athletes. There's a real reason why we want drugs out of sport. There's a real long-term health risk at the end of the day, and that is what we're protecting. I became an arbitrator for the Court of Arbitration for Sport, so that saw me go to Pyeongchang at the last Winter Olympics in Korea, which was fascinating, and that opportunity where I was actually on the panel deciding with the Russian athletes whether they would be invited to compete at the Games. So again, I was only one of 12 arbitrators from around the whole world, so great experience to talk with people from France and Germany and America, Canada, all over the place. But at the same time, really dealing with that high-pressured situation of we had a bobsleigh coach who had been to 7 Olympics, and he was very adamant of why wouldn't he be allowed to go to his 8th. And it's, just dealing with all the different stakeholders and the pressure of the situation is really interesting.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about the electorate? Because not many people would really know about it. As far as anyone can see, it's a giant surf club from what we'd see from the press from the current member. What kind of demographics are you dealing with? In our visits to Manly, to interview Cliffy Lyons or John Hopewade, we've seen it's quite industrial. It's not all just Justin Hemzone pubs and striped shirts. There's a bit going on. Well,
look, it's a very broad electorate. We are average age now is 38 in the electorate, so much younger. So millennials is now the biggest demographic as opposed to the baby boomers. So that's quite a shift. I think we've seen that with the property ownership and the property boom of the last 5 years. A big influx of professionals and young families, so clearly family issues are really important to the electorate. Affordability, cost of living, transport, they're all issues that people really care about, but also care about the environment and where we're heading as a nation. It has sort of some better leadership and better examples. Broad electorate, so we go from Neutral Bay to Lambie Heights and Forestville, so very broad. You tend to focus on Manly and the beaches, but you've also got Brookvale, you've got Manly Dam, so great natural environments, Mossman, Cremorne. We clearly have quite a spread in terms of wealth in the electorate. It's actually the second most wealthy electorate in Australia after Wentworth. But look, at the end of the day, we're an electorate with a lot of small businesses. We've got plenty of tradies, plenty of professionals. So it's very diverse. But overwhelmingly, I think the common message for people is actually socially progressive. So people do care. We care about our environment. We care about treating people equally and respectfully. And I think that really came out with the same-sex plebiscite. And that's what people are really asking for, is actually a new era with a slightly more respectful tone.
So just going back to the median age of your electorate, you said they were millennials, but you're not the first high-profile person to run as an independent against Tony Abbott. At the last election, we saw former Channel V star James G. Matheson, isn't it?
Yeah,
James Matheson. Andrew
yeah.
G's the other one. Oh, sorry, Osher.
And he didn't poll that well.
Well, surprisingly, he did better than you would think. He did 10%. So from an independence point of view, we had him at 10% and Mary Rowlands at about 8%. So that was already an 18% of the vote. Now, those guys did amazingly well in light of the resources they had. They had like a 3-week campaign, did the best they could with very limited funding. So I think James really captured the youth vote at the time. Now it has increased since that election because of the turnover, I think, of house ownership. So So there's no doubt that there is that more tech-savvy, more modern aspect of the electorate.
Yeah.
But to be successful, you actually have to appeal to all demographics. At the end of the day, you can't just be there for one group. You do need to still appeal to the older generation and reassure people that it is a safe change. It's a safe move to do. And in fact, when you're looking at an independent, a lot of people get really stuck on the idea of the polarised, main parties.
Yeah.
But they've been so unstable over the last 8 years. How could you ever think that a main party is a stable option? And if anything, as an independent, you're really there for the electorate. So I think it's your truer form of democracy that there's no hidden agenda, no party lines. At the end of the day, it's Warringah or nothing.
Yeah.
That is an interesting point you make because, after the Wentworth by-election loss for the Liberal Party, Scott Morrison said, well, Double Bay is different to Dubbo. And that was kind of him saying that, safest Liberal seat in the country until that point was actually made up of elitist lefties. But we've seen the independents come through everywhere. We've seen independents exist in Mount Isa. Bob Catter, they exist in Adelaide Hills.
Yep.
They exist in completely different parts of the world. And I don't think that's I don't think that's a particular political model that suits an electorate. It's just when they've kind of had enough with the major parties. What do you think is going to be your best bet on the ground? Who do you need to catch?
Look, you have to catch as many of everyone. But at the end of the day, it's whoever wants change. You have a very clear choice when it comes to the electorate for Warringah. You can stay with what you've had for 25 years or you can move on and have a new approach. I'm very focused on delivering results. My entire career from sport to as an advocate in law has always been about delivering results, setting big goals. Ironically, I've just come from a forum talking to school kids about setting big goals. Don't be afraid to dream big. So it is about setting ambitious targets and then working hard, breaking them down into the manageable bits and making it work. For me, it's a big electorate. It's a lot of people to win over. Clearly an incumbent that's I think he's a very tricky, experienced politician. He has his certain way of dealing with things, but I think overwhelmingly people are ready for a new approach. So for me, the biggest task is getting out there, seeing as many people, converting as many people over to don't believe the rubbish you're seeing on advertising and all the false stuff, and come and actually meet me in person and make up your own mind.
Now, Abbott has shown himself to be probably most effective in opposition, in that kind of bulldog capacity. And then, of course, when he was shafted from the position of Prime Minister, he then became pretty good in a similar kind of capacity within his own party. And, of course, many people are pointing the finger to him as the reason behind the August change of Prime Minister. Now, do you think you haven't seen him playing dirty yet?
Oh, no, we've got the dirty games playing at full swing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't bother me. I mean, there's nothing new, nothing surprising about it. Look, from my point of view, you've got a clear choice of what kind of person you want to be, what are the standards, what's your integrity. I think he's made it pretty clear where he sees his, and I don't think they've gotten any better over time. I don't know if he started out this way, but it's certainly how he's played the game for the last few years, and he's known as a wrecker. I think he's wrecked the Liberal Party internally, and there's no doubt that he was part of a very dysfunctional moment, I think, in Australian politics last year. Do
you think, and Turnbull has said this himself, that there were certain people in the party that would prefer to lose this next election than to see Turnbull win because of what he represented? Do you feel like there was it was almost like a self-implode, kind of Machiavellian type of decision?
Look, I don't know if I'd agree on that, because I think at the end of the day there's more of a delusion of actually people that have moved so far into their ideology that they actually lose touch with the idea that that ideology is not shared by everyone. So I actually probably believe that there may have been a part of that, but more importantly there was a firm belief that they could take everyone to the sort of far right and actually get people on board with that. I think it's a real losing touch of that moderate centre base of Australia, which is where most of us are. And it just ends up being completely lacking in representation.
So you, in your campaigning, haven't really had to deal with the ultra-Orthodox Catholic community in the Warringah electorate? You haven't had to appease them?
No, I deal with everyone. Look, my in-law family is very religious. My father-in-law is a knight of the Catholic Church. I respect and love him dearly. I think, like everything, it's about respect for everybody and their beliefs, their backgrounds, and their contributions to society.
So hypothetically, this election could go down to the wire. I mean, the destiny of this country could come down to the independents, again, if there's a hung parliament. And last time it was quite controversial how you had a country member side with the Labor Party to form the Gillard minority government. Just to be a fly on the wall of the room where there's you, Karen and Bob Catter.
What a group.
Sounds like a great sitcom.
When it comes down to the line where you're going to have to try to convince Bob to form a government, do you think you're prepared for that?
Totally. Look, one of the things as an advocate, as a barrister, everyone thinks it's like TV and you're there doing pithy one-liners and winning it over. 80% of our time is doing mediation, where you're bringing people that are very entrenched in very opposite views, and you have to bring them to the table and find the commercial resolution, and you have to find the middle ground and find the solutions. So I do think that's a pretty important part of my skill set, especially as an independent, where you are there to moderate. And so the tighter the parliament, the better ultimately, because it means no one side of politics has a mandate to go off and just go to the extreme or put in place policy that might be beneficial to their limited fan base, but not to the country as a whole. I think at the end of the day, I really believe that once you're in government, you're governing all of Australia, not just your electoral base. And so you have to come up with policies that are uniting and that deal for as great a percentage of the population as possible.
So are you well versed on what Bob's type of vision is for the water in northern Australia, whereby he was like, the Townsville floods could have been prevented if we dammed that entire valley,
we need $6,000 million.
Yeah, we need $6,000 million to build a canal down from the Gulf down through Burketown into Cloncurry.
This is sounding like when Roy and HD told me about the Smig and the Holes Olympics. Look, no, I joke, but this is serious. At the end of the day, I think independents play a really important role in our democracy. I don't think it's a question of pork barrelling in terms of what can you get for your electorate when it comes to who you support to form government. I think at the end of the day, the mandate as an independent from your electorate is to go forward and find that positive future and the sensible policies for Australia.
Yeah.
For me, a huge part is climate change, and I really want to see us having a sustainable economy, taking advantage of future opportunities. So that will be my baseline of how decisions are made.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned before governing for all of Australia. How are you going to feel if you do beat and topple Tony Abbot? Are you going to feel guilty about robbing Australia of a very competent Indigenous envoy?
Possibly not. I will try hard to do better. Well, I think it would be appropriate to empower our Indigenous people to, represent themselves in a more effective way.
And with the climate change kind of conversation, has that been something that you see right across the electorate?
Definitely. And not just right across the electorate, right across Australia. Yep. There's no doubt about it. It is, there's overwhelming support. I think the coalition has been completely out of touch or lost touch with where people's concerns are. It's a driving factor. I think when you're out there speaking to our youth, I've got teenagers, they are aware of it and they are frustrated at the lack of action. So the benefit of, I think, a number of independents really making it a key part of their agenda, you can't ignore it. It's been the conversation. I notice you don't hear the word coal from the coalition too often anymore. Mm-hmm. That's already a great achievement that we're shifting the conversation. We need to shift it further and we need to actually put it into play and actively move on it. But it's something that is just really important.
We've seen a lot of concession, you're right, with the coalition where some, even your opponent is now saying, it might all be real. And what do you think the thinking is of a Canberra tree trunk who is acknowledging this is happening but isn't doing anything about it. Where do you think they'll be in 40 years? Do you think that they are kind of comfortable with the house on top of the hill? And how do you think they rationalise creating policy that works against climate change?
It is really hard. Well, 40 years, I think some of them won't be around, considering the average age in Canberra. But at the end of the day, it is always, I find it so short-sighted, where people that are deniers, that just, I feel like it's putting your head in the sand to things that are happening. They're predictions. We don't know with certainty where everything's heading. No one's got a crystal globe to absolutely know, but you have to prepare for the future. You have to prepare for eventualities. And the attitude from the deniers camp of just ignoring it and letting it sort of play out is just so irresponsible to the next generation. Look, he's backflipped a few times on it. I don't think anyone could have any confidence in whatever position gets taken now. It's a purely reactionary position to the situation of an election. I think there are a few players, including the local member, who's prepared to say anything at any time that if he thinks it's going to get him over the line. I think everyone's a bit savvy to that, and I'm buying.
I guess that a lot of people in this electorate didn't really experience, the negative effects of climate change until, their pool on the beach up at Collaroy ended up in the Tasman Sea. I mean, that was probably the first time that they really were like, wow, this is something that's real. This is a shift in the climate that's going to affect my life.
Well, I think that's maybe a very visual one that everyone had to go on, but there's other ways. We've had the hottest summer, one of the hottest summers on record. I think it was the hottest January. Everyone is there experiencing the weather. We all experience those temperatures. And then it's also looking at droughts, and just watch the news every night. And, the first 4 stories on the news are some kind of climatic extreme event occurring, and everything seems to be getting more extreme, and so you sort of start to feel like you're in a Hollywood movie of, what's the next apocalyptic event that's coming. So and it is the hardest part about climate change is people tend to think, well, it's happening on a global stage, global scale. So how do you make it relevant on a local scale? Because unless it's locally that you're experiencing it, people tend to put it off to something that can be dealt with later on a bigger picture. But the oceans are warming, the fish species are changing. I've had people that have been surveying and keeping track of fish species around our local reserves that have been changing over time. So it's not just pools, it's, your energy prices. It's lots of different things that add up to an awareness that it's a problem.
Yeah. Just quickly, though, you were saying that people have stopped referring to coal, except, of course, for the National Party. And they are the Farmers' Party, but they seem to be more typically focused on mining now. In your experience, why don't the Nationals have the best interests of the farmers in mind, considering that they are basically the canary in the mine for climate change in this country?
It's a very strange bedfellows is how I kind of think about it. And I do think, ironically, in our country regions, there is a shift away from the Nationals because that focus on mining is really taking away from that focus on the land and the environment and protecting the land and the farmers and their way of life. So it's a very strange position to be in. And I think it's very short-sighted because the amount of jobs in mining is nowhere near the jobs in tourism and future technologies. From our economy's point of view, there is so much more growth opportunity in new technology. When it comes to renewables and all those aspects, there's just so much more. And the reality is with big mining is a lot of it is going overseas. So it's not actually profit that's coming back into Australia. Most of it goes overseas.
Some of it's not even taxed.
And much of it is not taxed. Very controversial. And then with AI, artificial intelligence, the actual amount of jobs you're talking about is less and less. Yeah. So it's I think it's a very misleading approach that they tend to take. Who's ever putting the price on the opposite? The price of jobs lost in tourism and industries that will be decimated by climate change. So I always feel the focus is on this sort of fear-mongering of what the cost of transition might be. Yeah. But the reality is the cost of lack of action is far greater.
Tony Abbot ran unopposed for Liberal pre-selection, and
there was an empty chair.
and nearly lost to an empty chair. So that's got to tell you that the Liberals are kind of more, even in the local area, are kind of swaying away from him. And we look at a lot of your, even though Abbott has called you a fake Liberal, we look at a lot of your policies and they do kind of come across as, there'd be people in the Liberal Party that agree with you on a lot of things. Is there the fear in the electorate that the moment you oust Tony Abbott, you're just going to join the Liberal Party like 2 weeks after that, and or you're going to keep running as an independent?
No one's actually ran that one. No. Look, I feel really strongly. I've always been an individual athlete. I took great joy in representing Australia at the Olympics and performing. I've represented my clients. I'm here to represent Warringah, so no, that's not a play. The reality is a lot of people are dissatisfied, and I have a huge traditionally Liberal voting base that are tired. They just want change. They want to move on. They feel that it's become so disrespectful, that he's wrecked the party, and that they're ready for a more proactive future and approach. And then, of course, you've got sort of the rest of the electorate that probably have been waiting for change a little bit longer.
Now, you have the opportunity now. We have a lot of listeners on the Batuta Advocate radio show. Are there any claims that have been made about you by your opponent and his mates in the media that you'd like to refute just right now?
Where do I start? The list. I mean, the irony is I've been called Mrs. Abbott for being too liberal. I've been called Shorten's candidate. I've been the Get Up candidate. I've been the carbon tags lady. It's sort of, the list is endless. I mean, we know Wikipedia's tried to make out that I'm a nude male magazine model. So, you know, I mean, it kind of is endless. At the end of the day, it's smear and fear. I find it's just so symptomatic of where politics are at and what people are really tired of. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to make everybody fear that person, what are you offering? I mean, what is your plan? Give people a choice between something, you know, if they don't like my policies, fine, but tell us what exactly you're offering that's any better. You
got to play the ball as well.
Totally play the ball. But look, I'm used to this environment. It doesn't surprise me. It was all stuff that I knew was going to be coming when I put my head up and decided to give this a go. I know there's worse to come, but again, if we've seen anything by events recently with what happened in New Zealand, politics can be so much better than what they are in Australia. And I think at the end of the day, it's up to all of us to call time on the divisive and the disrespectful language, the using misinformation, the not using the real facts on issues, and actually let's get back to a bit of integrity.
Yep.
So just quickly, one more question I'd like to ask you. You know, it's very easy to join the pile on for Tony Abbott, but do you have anything nice to say about his time as the member for Warringah?
Oh, look, at the end of the day, you can't deny he has a long service to the electorate. You have to be respectful of that. He has, for 25 years, served the people of Warringah in Parliament. You know, I think he has been involved with he's a local for the fire brigade. He's done work with Queenscliff Surf Club. So there's no doubt about it. He's done his period of service. And whether everyone agrees with his service or not, he has been there. He's been Prime Minister. He's had the opportunity to do things. I think at the end of the day, you are judged by your legacy and you are judged by what you achieved or failed to achieve. And that's something for the electorate to judge him on.
And it might be time, you think, to put him out to pasture where he can get a job with Gina Reinhart.
Well, he can get a job in.
I don't think he'll need a job after this, mate.
Do you think he's unemployable outside of this this role?
I have heard that he's worth about 100, just quietly.
Right.
Look, in sport, we see it all the time. You know, just because you've been at the top doesn't mean you're going to be at the top forever. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their day and everyone has to move on sooner or later. The hardest part is to know when it's time to go. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not uncommon that people don't know when it's probably the right time. But certainly for him, I think it's time.
Thank you for joining us today, Zali Steggall.
Thank you.
And is it time for Tony to vacate the position? Well, we'll let the people of the Warringah electorate decide that one. But one thing we will say from our media perspective is that ScoMo appears to be doing a much better job campaigning on behalf of his party than Bill Shorten, who, as we believe, has been locked in a broom cupboard in the CFMEU head offices in Melbourne. Even that hasn't really helped him going out there and putting his foot in it with several press conferences. What do you think, Errol?
No, I think Bill's got a lot of ground to pick up. I think that it really is a 2-horse race at the moment, and I think that one of the horses is definitely going to win, Clancy.
Yeah, it's very vague, so don't take that to the bookie. But, let's see how we go. Is it going to be the Happy Clapper from the Shire, or is it going to be the union former...
he was a trade unionist.
Trade unionist.
Yep. A privately educated trade unionist,
yes,
I will hold you that.
Career politician from the Port of Melbourne. We'll never know. But as for Tony Abbot versus Zali Steggall, this is probably going to be the closest one of them all. Thank you for listening to the Batuta Advocate podcast. I'm Clancy Overall. You be kind to each other.
And my name is Errol Parker. And as always, go fuck yourself, David Koch.